That's a great question that I'm sure a lot of you listening might be curious to hear. I stopped asking myself why. I think as much as I love Simon Sinek, I don't think we need to start with why. I think that we need to start with what. And it was because I kept starting with why I got confused for years. I would wake up with a different why statement. I wanted to do this one day. I want to do this the next day. It's like, this is my thing. This is my why. And I was very confused because I like so many different things. And, every time I would watch something, meet someone, I would change my mind and it would just leave me in this sort of this like rabbit hole or spiral. It was just going and going and going and not committing to anything. And it's fine to have multiple passions and multiple sweet spots, but how I ultimately did it was
Welcome back to another episode of the Being Yourself Show, where world-renowned thought leaders and best-selling authors share their wisdom and insight to help you achieve your goals and be more productive. If you're new to this channel, then do consider subscribing for your regular dose of knowledge and wisdom. I'm your host, Ajay, and my guest today is an author, an entrepreneur, and a globally sought-after speaker. She is the CEO of Ripple Impact. Her recent book, Innovation Starts with I, has got praises from Arianna Huffington, Seth Godin, Adam Grant, and more. In the book, she gives you 12 future-proof capabilities to take your innovation quotient to the next level, and that's all we will be talking to her about. So please welcome the professor, World Bank researcher, and a TEDx speaker, Saleema Vellani. Saleema, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ajay, for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Thanks a lot. So before we start talking about the book, let's find out what inspired you to write the book. And I've read this in detail in the book itself. You have given quite a lot of details, but I would like my budding author audience to know what is the inspiration behind.
Yeah, so great question. This book right here, by the way, Innovation Starts with I, it is actually a journey of my life, a journey of, reinvention. That's the story of my life, is a lot of reinvention. And it's interesting because the book, I could say there's two stories. The short story is that I started really committing to the book project and writing the book, fully on a regular basis since early 2019. But the backstory is that the journey started back in 2013 or 2014 when I had initially had the idea of writing a book, but I was in the middle of my own reinvention journey and I had not yet become Saleema 3.0 who I am today. I was still Saleema 1.0, an earlier version of myself, since I like to say that we're no longer, trying to peel layers like an onion to discover our true selves, but rather we are constantly changing, just the way the world's changing, technology's changing. Things are changing very rapidly. We're living in what I call the reinvention revolution, where we're being forced to reinvent ourselves faster and more frequently than ever before, as we see very recently with just the great resignation and many activities during the pandemic. But my own story, I started my career in a crisis, in the last economic crisis in 2009, when I graduated from college, and I couldn't find a job, and I became an entrepreneur really out of necessity. I'd done some volunteer work in Brazil to help finance an orphanage. I built co-founded this language school in Rio. It was very successful. And that's where I really learned, by being of service, by giving value and taking on this opportunity to volunteer, I gained all these entrepreneurial skills. And it was then that I was able to, when I couldn't get a job in Italy, when I moved from Brazil to Italy, I was able to, start a translation company that became a market leader, helping companies go global by helping translate their websites, their platforms, a lot of really, really interesting web work. But I hadn't, years later, I came to the United States and I hadn't really figured out, what I wanted to do. Like, I thought I was on this path of, after selling my translation business, I was on this path of, climbing a ladder, getting my dream job. I ended up getting, somewhat of my dream job in an international organization, but I realized how unhappy I was and how much I missed being creative and how much I missed being an entrepreneur again. So in 2013, 2014, I had gotten back into entrepreneurship, but more on going to startup weekends, going to different boot camps and wondering, well, how did I do it before? Because when I was an entrepreneur out of necessity, I wasn't aware that I was an entrepreneur. And that's the interesting part, was I was very quiet about it. I was embarrassed that it was my alternative to not getting a job. I was not part of any sort of startup community or had any mentors or investors or any of that sort of ecosystem, because I was living in the south of Italy, right? Come on, it's like Reggio di Calabria, right in the toe of the boot. There was nothing there. I mean, there were a lot of entrepreneurs, like, brick and mortar, but nothing to the sort of what I was trying to do, or what I just was not aware. So it was when I moved to the United States and I realized, oh, entrepreneurship is cool here and people are trying to become entrepreneurs, that I realized maybe, my perspective changed. I was like, well, maybe that's the life I actually miss and I want. And I couldn't figure out how to become an entrepreneur again. I was very good at helping other people through my own story with the translation business and the work that I had done previously. Very good at helping other people sort of unleash the entrepreneur within them. I was really great at sort of ideating and listening and giving feedback and advice from my own story, but I didn't know how to do it for myself again. I wasn't sure how to become an entrepreneur again. And so I decided to start, interviewing people, writing down some insights, reading books, listening to lots of podcasts, and I was trying to figure it out, and I got stuck. And since I got stuck, I also realized I needed to pause the book. If I couldn't figure this out for myself, how am I going to help other people? And I hadn't yet, finished living more of my own story. So I paused the book for about 5 years. And I decided it was time to pick it up again in 2019, when I saw that it could have a really big impact on many, many people around the world, especially in emerging markets, where entrepreneurship is the key to economic opportunities. And so yeah, that's a bit of a longer version of the story, but yeah, that's what inspired me to write the book, was really trying to figure out, how do you start, how do you take an idea, or how do you choose between ideas and start and launch a business successfully? Because it starts with I, happens with we, and can scale into the world, and we can talk more about that.
Are you now having that dream job that you were dreaming of some time ago now?
Yeah, it's the job at my own company as the founder and CEO. So currently I am doing the thing that I love doing, that I never thought I could do, which was really help entrepreneurs. And I never knew that there was a way to profit from this, since entrepreneurs are usually strapped on resources, but we're helping many, many entrepreneurs, be successful with their businesses, earn more revenue, build their platforms, their audiences, reposition their brands, and ultimately we're seeing the results, they're experiencing the impact, they're happy. And through our business accelerator and the community that we've built, many entrepreneurs have grown significantly from the work that we've done together. And again, that also started in another crisis or reinvention process when the pandemic happened.
And the gap that you said you took 5 years pause, and that was to live the values that you were going to write. Is that correct?
Yes, I was totally unaware that that was what I was going to write about, because I was so busy trying to solve my own crises in my life. But it was interesting, because shortly after I decided to stop, the whole book project and put it on pause, I totally forgot about it. Like, I never thought about it in the course of those 5 years. It rarely came to mind that I would pick up that project, because I was so busy living my story and trying to make an impact, trying to figure out who is Saleema 2.0 at the time. I also had a lot of things happen in my life. Like, this very house I'm in right now had a fire. The building had a really bad fire, and I was displaced for several months. And that's when I went. And that's when I went to India, Thailand, Bali. I went on this journey, this eat, pray, self-love trip, to rediscover myself, figure out, when I come back to Washington, who will Saleema be? And that was a lot of not just spending time alone and in ashrams and meditation and yoga and Ayurveda and all that, but it was also coming back to another crisis where I was forced to have 100 coffees over the course of 2 weeks and figure out how to get a job and a visa to live in the United States, because I'm Canadian. So that was a whole nother journey of myself. But what I realized many years later, as I was writing the book, was that self-awareness isn't just about how we see ourselves, but how do we see ourselves through the lens of other people, or how do we interpret the lens of other people and how they see us, and really understanding that. Because I think oftentimes we can kind of go into our own shell, and introspection. It's one thing to just spend a lot of time alone at home, especially during the pandemic, but how do we actually build relationships with other people so we can understand how they see us? Because it was understanding that value, that understanding the lens of other people, that has helped me be successful. Because if I had just stuck to what I wanted to do, that was not going to work. Same with the book. It was a lot of getting feedback and understanding how other people are perceiving it. And that has led to a lot of my success today.
Glad that you touched upon the point of self-awareness, and I was reading it. You've written quite a lot about it in the book also. How how do I know that I am kind of fully self-aware? How do I test myself? Or, I mean, there are a lot of people who, there is a lot of literature that one needs to be self-aware, do mindfulness, et cetera, et cetera. But is there a tool which can tell me that I am kind of borderline self-aware, or I am like fully self-aware, something like that? What
Yeah.
exactly is it to be self-aware, really?
Yeah, that's a very good question and comes up a lot because if you look at the research, this is one of my, some of my research in the book was looking at Tasha Eurich, who is doing a lot of interesting work on self-awareness. And she said something along the lines of only 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware. Most people think that they're self-aware, but truth is very few actually are. And how you determine that is there's this tool that I've adapted from her. It's called, I call it the 4 self-awareness archetypes. And if you see here in my book,
Yep.
there's different types of self-awareness. So there's, and this is from her actually, low external self-awareness, high external self-awareness, and really understanding where you fit between being, these are terms that I came up with, but between being a self-absorbed introspector, so being low on the external, but high on the internal, maybe like an introvert, somebody that spends a lot of time alone and knows who they are, but not really clear on how they're seen by others. A people pleaser, I've been all of these, but by the way, but a people pleaser is where you have very low internal self-awareness, but high external self-awareness. And a purpose seeker, somebody that is low on both internal and external self-awareness. And then, when you're high on both internal and external, that's when you're fully self-aware. And the thing is that we go in and out of these different reinvention cycles, right? We are constantly going through different reinventions in our lives, whether we do it reactively or proactively is your choice. I highly recommend try to be proactive by doing things like the 100 coffee exercise. Being proactive in your reinvention process involves, doing 100 coffee challenges, constantly practicing active introspection, where you're constantly getting feedback and engaging in conversations with other people, especially people that you don't know and people that are outside of your industry. It's not just talking to people that you know. Talk to people that see you positioned where you are today. You might get a very different insight. And oftentimes they might see you in the future version of yourself before you do. And that's why it's key to constantly be working on strengthening our self-awareness, because it's not like you just reach a point where you just know yourself. It's a constant process.
And I like that the chart that you just showed. I'll put the actual picture of it so that people can see it. But I really liked it in the way that now that you have like 4 quadrants, and every time there is something going on in your mind or something happening, you can see actually on which quadrant you are right now based on how self-aware you are. I think that's a really good tool that people can use. So yeah, thank you to put that together. So now going back to the main idea of the book about innovation, and then you say I, we, and the world. So that's like 3 things going together. Could you just explain the correlation of me and we and on a global scale? How does that relate to innovation?
Yeah, sure. So the best example I like to give is let's think about Steve Jobs, right? A lot of people think innovation is just about technology. I say it's about being human. It starts with the human level. And it starts at the individual level. It starts with I. And Steve Jobs, if you look at the iPhone isn't what I call innovation. It's the personal transformation process that happens within innovators, within entrepreneurs, because it really is. James Clear says as well, but it really is, entrepreneurship and innovation. It's really a personal transformation journey that's disguised as a business pursuit. So interestingly, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, right, when he first joined the company, and he went on his own journey to India to seek enlightenment and to do a lot of work on himself. And it was when he came back from doing all that inner work that he was able to come back to Apple and innovate and get a team to execute his vision, right? He was a visionary. And so ultimately, that's when, when you do that inner work and you really know yourself and you become somewhat of, self-actualized, or whatever term you want to use, you can then innovate, because then you're able to connect those dots. You're able to have the confidence to execute whatever it is you want to execute. You can, ignite those ideas within yourself, because oftentimes if we're just doing our daily grind, we can sort of have these ideas, but they come to us when we're like, in the shower, going for a walk, when we pause. And so when we do that sort of work, like for me, it was that Eat, Pray, Self-Love trip, or whenever I do sort of a similar Eat, Pray, Self-Love trip, when I spend some time alone, engage in conversations with other people, practice that active introspection, then I'm able to innovate. And it happens at the individual level, right? There's certain people that are very good at connecting those dots. They're visionaries, and there's a whole tool I have on the innovative team recipe. But the ideas person, usually the visionary, is the type to really come up with these different ideas. Now, in order to make them happen, it's about we, right? It's about collaborating, communities, organizations. It's about making things happen with who, because we can start with why, as Simon Sinek likes to say, but at the end, it's about, the who and how do we make stuff happen? And it's through people, right? If you think about companies that have succeeded and grown significantly, it's the people that drive the business, right? It's the team, it's happy customers, it's through collaboration, through partnerships. And Steve Blank, when I interviewed him, said that a startup is nothing different than a larger corporation, just a smaller version of it. And so same thing, and that's something we do at Ripple Impact, is we're the team behind the scenes to many entrepreneurs, and we encourage them and teach them how to build their own teams, because that's how you scale it. It's through the we. When you have a strong we, then you can make an impact on the world and you can scale up. And it's then that you have to really focus on prioritization, on adaptability, pivoting where you need to pivot, having a global mindset, and being able to really have a strong influence by building your own platform. And that's what the last part of the book covers, is the world. So it starts with I, happens with we, and can scale into the world. And there's a whole framework I've developed based on the 100 interviews I did, since I did a 100 coffee challenge in my book research journey and interviewed 100 people, including Arianna Huffington, Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas. But the Ripple Impact Framework, yes, here it is. So it's like essentially, starts with I, happens with we, goes into the world. And what I did was I basically analyzed all the different capabilities or skills that people were telling me when I asked, what are the skills we need for the future of work? And I came up with this framework, and that's how the book is divided, is among the I, we world and the different capabilities like self-awareness, curiosity, intuition, originality, collaboration, empathy, authenticity, storytelling, and then prioritization, adaptability, global mindset, and influence.
And you 5 minutes ago, you were also talking about you were a journalist, right? Is it correct?
A generalist?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a master generalist, I like to say.
So I read that your struggle to, finding your passion and stuff, and I was reading it and I could so connect with it. And I was like, what's wrong with being a journalist? And then you also mentioned about a book, which I happen to have read. I was just thinking, what's wrong with being a journalist? Why it is so important to find a sweet spot? Can a journalist never be successful? So I just wanted to know your views about that, because you've been there, and there are a lot of people who, like, jack of all trades, know a lot of things, but they don't really know what is the exact sweet spot they should be focusing on.
Great question. So being a generalist actually will help you innovate and thrive in the future of work, but being a master generalist, so you want to be good at a few different key areas. Myself, I decided, I want to be great at entrepreneurship, innovation, economic development, and anything in between that, education, and that's exactly what I do today. It's connected through all the different hats I wear, because as a generalist, or as what I call in the book, hybridpreneur, where you're both an intrapreneur within an organization as well as an entrepreneur, which is really important if you want to navigate and thrive in this future of work that we're currently living in, since there is so much transitioning happening, that a lot of people are realizing they want to build their own platform, their own brand, their own business, their own community. And I think, being a generalist is great, because you can adapt, you can bring a unique perspective by merging the different hats you wear, the different experiences, and it's no longer so important to just specialize in one thing. Now, sure, if you're a doctor, or you're an engineer, you have something very, very specialized, great. But we also see that a lot of these more traditional careers, especially in, healthcare, like, for example, if you're, a psychotherapist, but you're also, doing YouTube sessions and recording YouTube videos, and you're building a community on Instagram or on LinkedIn or whatever, and you're trying to expand your practice, then you have more options. If, your whatever career you take, let's just say you see a lot of jobs being replaced, or a lot of jobs being essentially gone in this future of work, at least where there's a lot of competition, how do you stand out? And by differentiating your hats and wearing different, diversifying, seeing your career as a series of projects, as a portfolio, you can thrive by wearing those different hats. And that's why I think, still specializing in a few different areas, but not just picking one area to just become the expert, but really trying to figure out how you can be good at a few different things, and having certain skills like, digital marketing, networking, a lot of these human skills I talk about in the book, like storytelling, empathy, collaboration. You can really thrive in whatever career you're doing by wearing those different hats.
And also, I think in addition to that, I believe you can increase your cognitive flexibility because you kind of connect unconnected dots, unconnected ideas. And I think you've mentioned that in the book also. So it's really, I mean, I'm feeling so much better now after hearing some praise. And I was like searching for books. There's only one book that I found about journalism, but yeah, thank you. So you also write in the book, and I think that's where we are still on the I section of the book. And you say that I ended up spending a lot of time trying to find my passion and figure out what's the optimal career path. And every time this left me, as in you, feeling more stuck. My question to you is, how did you finally find your passion?
Yeah, that's a great question that I'm sure a lot of you listening might be curious to hear. I stopped asking myself why. I think, as much as I love Simon Sinek, I don't think we need to start with why. I think that we need to start with what. And it was because I kept starting with why I got confused for years. I would wake up with a different why statement. I wanted to do this one day. I want to do this the next day. It's like, this is my thing. This is my why. And I was very confused because I like so many different things. And, every time I would watch something, meet someone, I would change my mind, and it would just leave me in this sort of this like rabbit hole or spiral. I was just going and going and going and not committing to anything. And it's fine to have multiple passions and multiple sweet spots. But how I ultimately did it was I stopped asking myself why. And it was a friend of mine who spent a weekend with me, on a whiteboard. And she said, let's look at what you've actually done. And we looked at what I had done over a whiteboard from my first job all the way to now. And it was just like earlier in the book process. This was in 2019. And it was interesting because we realized what are the things that I was really, really good at? What are the things that people sort of praised me for, thought that I was good at? I realized like, what are the things I love doing? And I came up with this framework as I started to analyze what I had done and the accomplishments I had, achieved throughout all the different things I had done. Sometimes if you don't do that work, it's really hard to figure out like, what do you have traction in? Where have you sort of, had your own conversions or traction or success in? And sometimes seeing how other people, really thinking about reflecting how other people have praised you in certain things that maybe you didn't think you were good at. And so doing that work, I sort of realized, I really like helping entrepreneurs, and I really like helping businesses. It was very far from where I was at the time. I was doing a lot of mentoring and a lot of, networking and stuff, but that was not where I was in that period of my life. And I was also unhappy in that period of my life, trying to figure out what's next for me. And doing that exercise of looking at the what, I was able to sort and figure out, well, this is how I can give value to people. And I started testing, giving value to people in different areas I wanted to test. And there's a tool that I have in my book called sweet spot mapping that you can use. It's in chapter 3, which is all about hybridpreneurship. But it's a really great tool to sort of, whether you want to use a Miro board, you want to use a whiteboard, you want to sort of just map it out on a piece of paper. It's a great way to, look at your different areas of strengths and figure out what's the sweet spot. And it's actually right here. If you look at it, it's called sweet spot mapping.
It's a breather for so many people who are still struggling to find their passion and take some action. And I totally agree with this model that you've just shown, and the asking what questions, what you're good at and how that can make some difference in other people's lives and what you like to do, right? I mean, if somebody says that, if your why question goes to I like to do, right? That's also a good enough answer for your why, right?
Exactly.
I like to do, and I'm just going to do it because I like to do. So yeah, I hope people will find it really useful. There is, let me change the subject a little bit, and let's talk about something that I really very recently found that there's one skill that a lot of people kind of lacking, and it's so difficult to not really understand what it means. And that skill is listening. And you have spoken about it in the book, in your, I think in your we section, I believe. And you've given a classification, and I'm like kind of doing some sort of research. In my last interview also, I did ask a lot of question about listening, because the author also written something similar. So you have given some 4 different levels of listening, which I really want my audience to also know, like self-listening, fact listening, empathetic, and collaborative. So if you can just give us a kind of rundown to them, how different they are, that'll be really helpful for people who don't even know that they're not good at listening.
Yeah, so that's a great one. And here it is, the 4 levels of listening. So it's a great tool in the book. It's something I actually am struggling with myself sometimes, is listening. It's a very hard skill, because similar to self-awareness, we often can think that we're good listeners, but what is a good listener? And I think that's very subjective, right? It's very relative. But it definitely is a skill that, it's a legacy skill that came up in my interviews when I was doing the research for the book, but it's a very important skill to really listen to people, make them feel heard. Oftentimes, when we're thinking we're listening and we want to respond quickly, we're thinking about what to say when the person hasn't finished talking. We haven't taken a pause to really soak in, absorb what they've said. And like I said, I struggle with it still. It's something that I want to get better at. I know many people, now that I've studied a lot about listening, I see a lot of people struggle with it as well. And it's the reason for a lot of communication breakdowns, relationship breakdowns. And the leaders, people who really embrace and develop the skill can be very successful, because a lot of, empathy, a lot of the skills that are in the book and in general for the future of work are involving to some degree, a good listener. So in the book, I talk about the 4 levels. So there's self-listening, facts listening, empathetic listening, and collaborative listening. So self-listening, it's really, it's the most common. It's when we're not really listening, we're thinking about how someone's words are making us feel, and then we're already thinking about how to make a response when the person finishes talking. And oftentimes we're making it about us. We're trying to relate to it ourselves. But when we're, the person's not necessarily wanting to, you tell your own story, which I have a whole tool on what empathy is not in the book as well. But yeah, that often happens when we're like, what are my thoughts on this? And then there's facts listening, which is level 2, where we're just hearing what the other person is saying. So we could potentially repeat what they said, but we haven't really tapped into their feelings. And we're thinking more, what are they literally saying? And then there's empathetic or empathic listening, where we're listening to the feelings that are being expressed. This is level 3. And we're trying to adapt reactively. So we may or may not be paying close attention to the actual content of what's being said. And sometimes there's a disconnect between what's being said in words and what are the feelings and demeanors that are being expressed. And this is where we're really paying attention to what emotions are they expressing. And then collaborative listening. This one is interesting, because this is the most connected form of listening, where we're listening with curiosity and openness. And this comes naturally to certain people, especially people with a high degree of intuition, whereas for some people, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of awareness to get there. And this is where we're really trying to listen to what are their own unspoken words. You might see people that are very intuitive. They might be able to just spit out what you might not realize or be aware of what you really want to say. And they kind of complete your sentence, or they'll add on to something and repeat back to you. Very good therapists, or, very good people that work in certain industries where listening is a very important skill. A lot of times they have that high degree of intuition, and they can kind of complete those unspoken words. And so, we really want to focus on the empathic listening and the collaborative listening.
Yeah, it's really so important to listen to what has been said, but also know how to listen to what has not been said. So I'm glad that you touched upon that as well. And you also spoke about listening inspires empathy. And then in the book, you write about empathy inspires innovation. And that was something I found a little bit of newer connection for me. So could you share some thoughts or any events in your life wherein you felt that listening actually inspires innovation? What had happened? Any event or anything that you can share? Just throw more light on this concept that listening inspires innovation. Sorry, empathy inspires innovation.
Yeah, so I think with empathy, interestingly, I'll give you the story of, the beginning of the pandemic, when I was in my own sort of trying not to panic. I was trying to be proactive about my reinvention. I was catching up with people, doing a 100 coffee challenge. doing the active introspection, writing the book in the earlier stages. And interestingly, I realized a lot of people were coming to me for help. They were asking me for advice. How did you build your LinkedIn platform, your audience, your community? How did you get a TEDx? How did you build a remote team? How did you do this? How did you do that? And I was like, or how did you do your book marketing, et cetera? And I was like, oh, wow, people are interested in like what I do behind the scenes. And I started to really like listen and take notes on, and I would have one of my employees at the time also interview some of my colleagues to try to understand, because obviously my perspective was biased and I wanted to really hear what they thought that I was very good at. And so it was interesting because I started advising and coaching and consulting, like giving a lot of advice to entrepreneurs. But when I really listened to their feelings, because they would be blown away by the amount of advice and the quality of the advice they got when we would meet for sessions. But then I would also see they were very overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, they had no idea what they really needed. It's kind of like Uber, Airbnb, like many of these successful companies. We didn't really know what was the solution, right? But we knew that there was some sort of problem, and there was a disconnect. And I realized maybe I wasn't truly helping them as much as I thought I was helping them. Did they feel supported? I think they felt stressed out, is what they would tell me. And so it was then that I was like, well, let me teach them how to build a team themselves to execute a lot of the advice I was giving them. Interestingly, I had already failed at doing that many years before. And I was like, well, maybe it's time to give another shot. I used to work for Upwork when they hired me it was Elance at the time. They hired me to tell my story to entrepreneurs and help launch WeWork here in DC, the different co-working spaces. And they wanted me to inspire other entrepreneurs and encourage them to build remote teams using their platform. And so that startup education program failed because a lot of entrepreneurs didn't make the best managers or know how to hire remotely. And they were focused on hiring local back in those days in 2013 to 2015. And it was interesting because I ended up trying to teach that again and teach people to build remote teams. But they often didn't have like the leadership or the managerial skills or who to hire, how to vet the talent, how to recruit, how to manage employees, how to prioritize tasks and this sort of thing. And then I realized I was stressing people out because now they were getting assistance and maybe they were less stressed out as before, but their businesses weren't growing. And I was like, oh man, I'm not really helping them. And it took a lot of listening to the unspoken words, the collaborative listening, as well as the empathic, where I was really trying to listen to their feelings when they were overwhelmed, and realize, well, maybe I need to do something different. And as much as it was very scary to take the leap and become the team to these entrepreneurs, and offer to be their behind the scenes team and offer them not just advice, but also creative services. We built a creative agency, and that was way out of my comfort zone because I am not a designer or even a creative director. Like I love aesthetics. I love how design can, graphic design, any sort of creative work can really amplify, especially when it comes to brand repositioning and business growth and, early stage entrepreneurs. But it was way out of my comfort zone. But I realized that's what they needed. And that's the solution that they didn't know they needed exactly, but they knew that something was missing. It was not just advice they needed execution help. And just telling them to go to Fiverr or Upwork or go hire a freelancer was not necessarily getting them the results that I was getting. And so it was really through listening that we were able to innovate. And we were like, well, let's try to see how we can help a group of 8 women and build a business accelerator around that and let them give us feedback as we add more structure to it. And it was through the listening to the feedback that we were able to scale up the accelerator to what it is today. So, and we're still always listening to our customers, getting that feedback, improving, iterating. And it's through those iterations that each time we come back stronger, each time customers are happier, we grow, the team grows, the accelerator grows, and our clients grow. So that's why listening is very, very key to innovation.
It is. And thank you very much for sharing that example. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which was authenticity. And you have written in the book as well about it. I was just wondering, how do you say that somebody is being authentic or non-authentic? You also say that your first version, like just saying whatever comes in your mind first, is not enough being authentic, right?
So it's interesting because you want to practice authenticity. It's not just about being yourself, right? You have to figure out how can you be of value to other people, and have a productive conversation. Where is it just for you to release? Like if it's you're talking to your own therapist or something, and the goal is for you to express your own feelings. it's a different situation. But if you are having a business conversation, being authentic, it's not just being yourself. You have to figure out, well, what will, you want to empathize with who you're talking to and figure out like, well, how can I, have a certain level of vulnerability or a certain level of authenticity. But still, especially if it's the first time you're meeting someone, you don't want to just spill all your beans. You have to develop a certain amount of credibility. And that's what Adam Grant often talks about is, having credibility before you just share everything about yourself. We see that today, like a lot of people want to bring their whole selves to work, but until you develop a certain level of credibility and you show, who you are, but also what you're able to do, that will then enable when you're more vulnerable, you're authentic, you'll get more, it's like a better impact or better results from doing that. Because you also have to think like, what's the purpose of sharing? And I'm all about sharing, I'm all about being vulnerable. But again, in certain instances where I've done it, it wasn't the right environment or the right, it was my first impression where I started to make it about myself. And it wasn't about myself. It was about, the other people that were around me, and just sharing my own story in that very moment wasn't necessarily, I was doing it more for myself. And I realized that we have to, when we're being authentic, it's not just sharing everything about us publicly. It's about figuring out like, how can we actually help other people through this, but also earning credibility or, developing credibility before doing that.
Yeah, I think I asked these questions because people really get confused about how to share their vulnerabilities, when to draw the line, what to be shared, what not to be shared, how authentic is actually authentic, those kind of things. It's really worth knowing the thought process behind all of these concepts from people such as yourself. So thank you very much for that. There's one question I would like to ask Saleema, which is for my budding author listeners. So this is your first book. Congratulations on that. Tell us about how did you pull this together? So you've given all the background, but I'm just going on to the finding a publisher and having your release and things like that. Anything that you want to share which could be useful for somebody who's wanting to write their first book?
Yeah, so amazing question. And this is stuff that I wish I had listened to myself before I got started. But, even my own book, this baby, it was self-published, and we raised over $50,000 with crowdfunding and getting bulk book pre-orders in advance, from organizations. A year and a few months before publishing it. It took a lot longer. It's like starting a business. Writing a book is like starting a business where you really have to go through iterations, pivots, a lot of work to launch. And it's for that launch, but then also post-launch, and a lot of work is needed to develop a good book. And for me, getting feedback, having beta readers give me feedback, really honest feedback, because it was a failure at one point, and I had to, or at a couple of points, and I had to rewrite the book many times. And so I think that those failures led to its success because I was able to adapt and incorporate that feedback and use the listening, right, to innovate. Essentially, I decided to self-publish. I initially was looking for a publisher, and then I realized with the advice I had gotten that it was best for me to build my own platform and self-publish, because I would own all the rights, the royalties, like everything would come to me, and I could get creative with how I wanted to distribute it, how I wanted to sell it. I could get creative with the creative process behind the book, since the book is very visual, and I had my own team already. And I was like, well, we can pretty much do a lot of things here. We can work with certain vendors or contractors, suppliers for certain things. But ultimately, we were able to do a lot of the stuff in-house. And we realized through some of the frustrations of working with different people throughout the process that maybe it's a good thing for us to sort of figure out how to do it better ourselves. And so we can help other people. What was interesting was after the Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign, when we raised all that money, when I had to deliver the book, was that I had to really focus on getting the book done to deliver it. But we started helping other authors, other aspiring authors, soon to be published authors, author entrepreneurs, a lot of founders who were trying to, publish a book to strengthen their credibility, increase their visibility, become a recognized authority, build their platforms, et cetera. And we started helping them because we were already very good at the book marketing. And so it became now a service. And we actually have a whole author accelerator for mostly entrepreneurs who are, trying to launch a book. And we go from the very early stages, from like a concept idea phase all the way through publishing. And we built Ripple Impact Publishing in order to publish my own book. And now we're in the process of figuring out how we can support more authors. We're actually building a membership-based community to help other authors in the book marketing space. So yeah, that's going to be launched this year. But essentially, I think that if you have an idea, you're an entrepreneur, having a book is like a business card today. And it's something that, there are a lot of books out there. I can't say a lot of people read books anymore, but essentially, if you have a book that has tools, a book that's strategically connected to your business, a book that your clients would love, it's important to be strategic with your book goals and how they're connected to your business goals. I mean, some people just want to write a book out of their passion, and that is a whole different situation. But especially if you're a nonfiction business book or a book to, for your career, for your profession, it's important to do a lot of the strategy work early on and figure out how can you write a very good book that will help you and your business grow to the next level, and how can you reposition yourself, based on where you see yourself a few years from now. Because right now, a lot of people are positioned to where they have been in the past or where they are now. But when you position yourself and tell the story of where you're headed and where you want to be, that's when you attract opportunities to accelerate you there. And that's, the opportunity of being an author. It's also figuring out, like, for me, I was in Saleema 2.0 and I didn't know what Saleema 3.0 was yet, but it was a transformative process in itself. So I went through a reinvention process during the process of writing the book and came out a very different person, which is why I had to rewrite the book at the last minute to reposition myself.
And during your fundraising campaign, you went out with the target of 25K, and then you reduced it due to some fear to 10K, and then you ended up raising 50K. I just wanted to know, what was that? Why did you reduce it? And then how come you managed to pull 50K?
Yeah, so interestingly, I was scared of, rejection. And even during the campaign at the 25K, it was very scary because there was a lot of taking things personally and a lot of personal connections, not supporting or rejecting. And I had to realize not to take anything personally anymore, because this is not personal. This is people, if they want to support, they can support. A lot of people supported, a lot of people didn't support. And then a lot of people who I didn't know showed up and supported in ways I did not imagine. And the reason I reduced the target was fear of failure, right? I was like, well, if I want this to succeed, because at the end of the day, the crowdfunding campaign is like a marketing campaign. We're trying to get pre-orders for the book. We're trying to build a community. It's different from self-financing it and just putting a book on Amazon. You want people to be part of the behind the scenes journey, to help be invested in the process of bringing the book to life, so they feel they're part of it. And interestingly, it was a few close friends of mine who were like, Saleema, that's a very ambitious goal. Like, I wouldn't raise more than $5,000 or $10,000. I was like, what's the point of fundraising and doing all that work for such a small amount of money, and just publishing a book without having the ability to go on a book tour, the ability to potentially translate it into other languages, the ability to make donations to women entrepreneurs, underserved women. What can we do with 5 or 10K? Sure, you can just get a book published, but I knew I wanted to make it a really big deal, and I wanted to impact a lot of people. I wanted to get into places that, maybe like the emerging markets and places that are, less focused on oftentimes. And I really wanted to make my impact in certain areas. And so I ended up, choosing to just go ahead last minute, the morning of it. My business partner, business strategist here at Ripple Impact, he was like, just go for, the 25. And we figured out a really good strategy to focus on, who are the people that want the pre-orders and just want to read the book, and who are the people that maybe will never read the book, but they want to support me. And how do we target both those audiences and maximize how much we can, get through that campaign? And ultimately, it was very successful. We raised, just under 40,000 for just on Indiegogo. I think it was like 36 or 37,000, and then we got a bunch of corporate sort of bulk book order ebook packages that we sold as well. That included like a keynote or fireside chat or whatever. And ultimately we raised over $50,000, which has enabled me to do all the things we do today. It was the seed money for Ripple Impact to be born. We were able to reinvest that and grow it significantly, and not just make an impact on my goals and stuff and making that come to life, but also helping other authors, helping other entrepreneurs, growing our team, being able to go on book tour, which I just came back from Dubai, Oman, El Salvador, and Colombia, and be able to travel the world and share my message, especially in the places that would most benefit from it.
It's a really good story and inspiring, because for the people listening and they're planning to write their first book, everybody has fears of failure, or maybe many different kind of fears. So thank you very much for sharing that story with us, Saleema. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So there is one question that I ask all my guests, and I'm going to ask you the same, which is what, according to you, are the top 3 skills that we all need in order to be successful, but schools are not teaching?
Yeah, that's a great one. Interestingly, I teach social entrepreneurship to some underserved high school students, and it's great because it's very experiential, and we get them to launch essentially like a business or like a project over the course of just a couple of weeks or a course of a couple of months, depending on what cohort they're in. But essentially, I think there's a few that I would say that are very key that I know myself have gone through traditional schooling, and I did not learn some of these skills. And I would say it's a lot of those human skills, those communication skills. Um, there's certain things like I was always shying away from being part of debate club. It was always challenging because I was very good at school, and it was good at getting my grades and doing well and all that stuff. But there were certain skills I didn't learn, and some of those ones are and it also depends on the type of school you go to, right? But I would say that originality is a really good skill to have, where not just being original, but how can you be non-obvious? How can you be innovative? How can you develop an innovative mindset? It's not just about doing something novel, but how can you take existing ideas and package them or put them together in new ways that create value for people? So I'd say originality. I think it depends on the school you go to or what level of education. Self-awareness sometimes is not emphasized enough. I would say some schools, yeah, curiosity, they allow that in certain, they practice that. Intuition, another skill that oftentimes we don't learn in school. So I'd say between originality and intuition. I also think authenticity, that one we don't often learn in school either. But I'd say it would be hard to pick just 3. I would say, prioritization. If you go to grad school or you're in a very intense situation, you might have to learn time management just because you have to with all of the overwhelm. But I would say, all 12 of these future-proof capabilities are really important, and most of them are not, taught in school. So that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and especially the self-awareness. And there are something that I was looking on internet about how to teach children self-regulation, which is a kind of self-awareness exercise into understanding your own feelings, how you're feeling and how you're reacting based on that. That is something is not taught in schools, but I think it's a part of the self-awareness bit, right? Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll have to stop this interview, but I really enjoyed talking to you, Saleema. The book is a treat. Thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for interviewing me, for having me on your show. And I hope this was of value to whoever is listening. And feel free to follow me. I'm on social media, Saleema Vellani. LinkedIn is where I'm most active. You can also learn more about the book at innovationstartswithI.com.
I'll put all those links down there. And for the people listening or watching this, if you really want to know more about innovation and how you can connect it with yourself and the people around you and the entire world, then the book Innovation and I is actually a good treat for you. It's not really very big book. It's around 288 pages or something like that. So it's a very easy read, lots of visuals for you to understand for the concepts. So please do check out. I'll put all the links down here. And then if you've still not done so and you found some value from this interview, then this is the time when you hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so that you get notification to my future interviews. Until then, I will see you again. Until then, you take care and keep learning.